Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the various forgotten collectible card games of old. Now, these collectible card games have waned in popularity for some reason. This doesn't mean they're not still being played, or there's still some support out there. But normally this means that the main companies that were printing them do not anymore. It means that the majority of players have stopped playing them. It means as they have fallen from any kind of grace that they once had. The top popularity, the top like and production of the game has faded to nearly nothing. Granted, again, people will be out there that will enjoy and love these games, but for those of you that have never played them or be interested in learning about them, is where we're at here. So, I've been talking about Star Trek, the customizable card game. Of course, we're going to finish up talking about the rules today. So, let's start, of course, with captives and your brig. Now, there are some cards which will allow you to take an opponent's personnel and remove it from their side of the board and put it into a special zone on your side of the board called the brig. The brig is, as I said, a special zone where all the personnel that are within it are referred to as captives. Personnel that were within the brig cannot use their card text, cannot use their attributes, their skills, and certainly cannot take any kind of actions. They are just there. If I have a unique personnel in someone's brig, then I cannot put out another copy of that unique personnel under my command. The fact is, though, that those personnel in anyone's brig are not under command when they are there. Some cards may refer to cards within the brig. If something says your brig or the personnel in your brig, things like that kind of phrases, it's referring to an opponent's personnel in your brig in particular, not your personnel in an opponent's brig. Now let's move on and talk about some terms from the glossary. We've gone over a lot of large terms throughout the series talking about the rules, but I want to go over a few more terms, in particular using some of the terms we've already discussed and some other new terms that we really haven't mentioned, and let you know what they mean and a little bit more information about them. So let's start with commander. Commander is a term that will say, commander, list a ship. This will show up on personnel. This is a way of linking a personnel in particular as the commander of a certain ship. In general game terms, this means nothing. What it can mean is that this commander, this ship, may have certain bonuses or game text abilities that activate once you have, of course, this commander in this ship. They're intrinsically linked together, and these cards themselves might mention something along the lines of them being together, giving you an extra effect. Otherwise, nothing. Now, discarding. We do want to talk a little bit about more about discarding. When you discard, it's face up all the time. I put it face up so people can see what I'm discarding. I discard one card at a time, meaning if I have to discard a whole bunch of cards, it's just one at a time. Order of discarding does not matter. And anybody can look at the cards I'm discarding while I'm discarding it. That means they can take a look, oh, what are you throwing out here? What's going into your discard? At any time, I can look through my discard, kind of look, oh, what's here? What's here? I can't look at my opponent's discard at any time. I mean, I could technically kind of glance over what's the top of their discard, but I can't go over there and look through their cards. When I'm returning a card from my discard to anything, whether it goes back into my library, goes into my hand, goes somewhere else, once I'm doing that, I have to reveal that card to everyone so they can all see the card I'm getting out of my discard before I place it wherever is appropriate, to removing it from there. Now, equip with is a phrase describing a piece of equipment being with a personnel. This personnel is equipped with this equipment. Now, there are some cards which may particularly talk about equipped with, but usually it will discuss that personnels in general are equipped with equipment in general, and the linking of that in particular. So sometimes mentioning specific personnel, mentioning specific equipment, but oftentimes this is more of a generalization. Examine calls for a card to be looked at, whether it's a card under your control that you're showing everyone else to examine, or you're being allowed to examine a card under an opponent's control. Examine just means I'm taking a look at it, I'm seeing like, what's on this card? What abilities do you have? What can you do? Modifiers are numbers that are either being added or subtracted to other numbers in play. These can be distances for missions, modifiers for ship range, or for attributes. These numbers, again, are either added or subtracted. It will tell you what it's doing for these numbers to modify the existing numbers to something more. The important thing to note here is if you are subtracting, basically removing numbers, you can go below 0, but no matter what number you are, 0 or below, you're treated as 0. That means if I had a -3 after all my modifiers to whatever number I'm working with, it counts as a 0. The only important thing here is to note that that -3 exists, because then if I start adding positive modifiers, I have to get back above 0 for it to not count as 0 anymore. So from 0, -1, -2, -3, all those numbers count as 0 until I can get it back to +1. That's if I want it to be +1. Now let's talk a little bit about moving ships when it comes to this portion. The fact is, there are some things that I do have to talk about when it comes to moving ships. We've talked about the range of the ships, and that we add the two distances for the missions together to figure out the total amount of range you have to spend spanning them. The fact is, if these two missions are different quadrants, then when I'm adding these numbers together to figure out the total amount of range I'm spending traveling between them, I have to add 2. It is more expensive to travel between missions that are in different quadrants, so pay attention to quadrants. On the other hand, if a mission lists a region, that means I'm in quadrant, let's say Alpha Quadrant, I'm in this region, traveling between two of the same region missions cost you 2 less when you're trying to figure out how much range you're spending. So if it's in this region here, my same region over here, it's easier for me to travel between those two regions. 2 less. Now, when something tells you to name a card, you name its title, not your subtitles. This is an important thing because if I'm naming a specific title, that title could show up on multiple different versions of the card that may have different subtitles. So I could name a particular unique character, and there might be different versions of that character with different subtitles, but all versions of that character would count for me naming it here. Now, if something tells me to remove it from the game, it's going to a special extra pile beyond your discard or any of the normal piles you have in play, called your remove from game pile. These cards are just kept here. You don't interact with them anymore. The only time that you're going to do something with them is at the end of the game. You're going to shuffle them back into whatever their appropriate decks are at that point in time. It's removed from the game until then. Now, something to call for you to reveal something. This is revealing a card that people cannot see, usually from your hand, though it could be from another source, top of your library, somewhere else. When you reveal it, you show it to all of your opponents when it's telling you to reveal it. Whoever is the revealer shows it off. Everyone gets to examine the card, and then the revealed card gets returned to wherever it came from, once again hidden from view. It's a chance for everyone to take a look at it, to examine it, before it disappears again. Now, random selection has you gathering all of the material that you're randomly selecting from, shuffling it, and then normally having an opponent draw the randomly selected card. Though some random selections could give other details. They could say perhaps you take 5 random cards of some type, and then your opponent chooses one of them, or some other kind of detail that will tell you how the opponent or how you will determine which of these randomly selected cards is being done, well, randomly. Now, personnel will oftentimes also list species. Species is an important thing to matter with because if something mentions species, these two personnel could have the same species, they might not. If a personnel does have 2 species, then it will have to match both of them exactly, technically to be the same. And sometimes species does match affiliation, but not always. That's another important thing. Sometimes this species and this affiliation will be exactly the same. Other times they will not be. So that's why you do have to pay attention to it, because normally when we're talking about a specific species here, you have to look at that actual species, not the affiliation. It will mention which of these it actually is. Now, an important thing for stopped is if I have stopped personnel on a ship, of course it cannot staff that ship. They can still be on that ship and travel with that ship. They just cannot participate in staffing it. Everyone else can still staff it that's aboard that ship. It's just going along for the ride while it's stopped. It's also important to note that stopped personnel and ships cannot be affected by other cards or effects In particular, unless it mentions stopped things. So if I have a card that mentions a stopped personnel, stopped ship, then it will affect it. Otherwise, if it doesn't mention anything here, I can't affect stop things with this. Equipment is never stopped. So though the personnel or the ship that the equipment is on or connected to is stopped, the equipment itself is not stopped. Now, for the final thing I want to talk about today is first edition compatibility. In the lower left corner of a number of second edition cards, it will have a note saying it's first edition compatible. This means if I am playing with first edition and buying second edition cards, I can use these cards in particular without any problem. I just integrate them into my first edition deck. Bam, there you go. Other cards may still be able to be played with, but will require some kind of adaptation, which you can look up online. With some adaptation, they can be used in your first edition games. Most of your second edition cards technically can be in this way if you want to adapt them. Otherwise, you find out which of these cards are, and you could throw them into your first edition deck, play with them just fine. First edition rules, which we haven't talked about. So that's it for today. I finished up the rules. We're done with it. Now, there's an important thing I do want to talk about. First edition. It's the red herring of the rule. I've been talking about the second edition rules, which are, to a degree, different than first edition. If there is an overwhelming support for me talking about how first edition rules differed from second edition, let me know in the comments if there's enough support for it. I will, in the future, do a series talking about first edition. For now, I'm going to move on after I do a few more things with Star Trek customizable card game. I'm going to do deck building next, and then hopefully some gameplay. I will probably stream those and upload those at some point during the week. I know I didn't do this for Vampire: The Eternal Struggle. I'm behind on those. I'm going to try to get both of those out in the upcoming weeks, hopefully organize those and get them ready for you to see. But again, if you do want to hear more about how first edition rules worked a little differently, let me know. I personally stuck with the second edition because I feel that this is a better version of the actual game. The first edition, as I talked about in my history videos, sacrificed gameplay for Star Trek-ness. This one didn't. So it's less Star Trek-y, better gameplay. That's why I've been talking about the second edition. But anyway, I hope you're having a great day, and until the next time, I bid you farewell.